Have you ever felt like you're at war with yourself? One part of you desperately wants to eat everything in sight, while another part is screaming, "No, don't do it. You shouldn't be eating that." If you've experienced this, you are not alone and you're not broken. What if I told you that understanding these parts, really understanding them, could change everything? Today, we're diving into why you have these different parts, what they're actually trying to do for you, and why fighting them keeps you stuck. Welcome to Binge Eating Breakthrough, the podcast to help you stop feeling out of control around food and build trust with your body. If you've tried everything but still feel stuck, you're not alone. I've been there too. I'm Jane Pilger, and I'm here to help you see binge eating in a new way so you can finally break free. Each week, you'll get the tools and insights to create peace with food and your body. Your breakthrough starts now. Hello, trusted listener. I consider you a trusted listener because I trust that you're willing to look beneath the surface of your struggles with food. I trust that you're open to seeing things in a new way, a way that might challenge some of your assumptions about yourself and why you binge. And I trust that you're here because you're ready to move from fighting yourself to understanding yourself. Today, we're talking about something that might sound a little unusual at first, but I promise you, if you stay with me, this could be one of the most important concepts you learn on your journey to freedom from binge eating, freedom from any struggles with food. We're talking about parts, the different parts of you. And specifically, we're going to explore the part of you that wants to binge or wants to eat a lot of food. That part that most people hate. The part they wish would just go away. The part that feels threatening or out of control. Now, before you think I've gone off the deep end here, or this all sounds a little weird, let me just say that understanding parts is not some fringe concept. There are various healing modalities and therapeutic approaches that talk about parts or aspects of your personality. Internal Family Systems, or IFS, is one well-known example, and it was developed by Richard Schwartz. But this idea shows up in many different frameworks because it reflects something true about how we're wired as humans. And here's what I know from my own experience and from working with countless clients. When you start to understand that you have parts, and when you learn to work with them instead of against them, everything changes. Not overnight, and not magically, but profoundly. So let's start with what most people experience. You know that feeling when you're standing in front of the refrigerator or in front of the pantry and one part of you is saying, "Yes, I want to eat all of this right now." And another part of you is saying, "No, stop. You shouldn't do this. You're going to regret it. You're not even hungry." That's parts. Or maybe you've noticed this. Maybe you notice sometimes when you binge, when you eat a lot of food, you feel rebellious. Like a teenager who's breaking all the rules and doesn't care what anyone else thinks. Other times, you might feel scared or young, like a small child who just needs comfort. And still other times, you might not feel anything at all. You're just on autopilot, going through the motions. These are different parts. They're not mood swings. They're not character flaws. They're not evidence that you're broken or inconsistent or weak-willed. They are parts of you, each with their own perspective, their own feelings, and their own protective purpose. Now, here's what I see happen with most people when it comes to the part that binges, the part that really wants to eat a lot of food. They hate it. They're at war with it. They want it to go away. They see it as the enemy, the thing that is ruining their life, sabotaging their goals, keeping them from being who they really want to be. Now, I get it. I completely understand this reaction because I used to feel exactly the same way. I hated the part of me that binged. It didn't feel like me. It felt like some invasive force that would take over and make me do things that I didn't want to do. I wanted that part gone. I thought if I could just get rid of it, eliminate it, make it disappear, then I would be free. But here's what I've learned, and here's what changed everything for me. That part wasn't the enemy. It was trying to protect me. Now, let me say this again because it's so important. The part of you that binges, the part that reaches for food when you're not physically hungry, the part that feels out of control, it's not trying to damage you or to sabotage you or ruin your life. It's trying to protect you. It's acting from a place of protection, not destruction. Now, I know that might be hard to believe. You might be thinking, how is binge eating protecting me? It is causing me so much pain and shame and struggle. And you're right. It is causing pain. But that doesn't mean it's not also trying to protect you in some way. For me, I came to understand that the part that binged was protecting me from feelings I didn't want to feel. Uncomfortable emotions, difficult situations, painful memories. Binge eating was a way to numb out, to escape, to not have to be present with what was actually happening in my life. It was also protecting me by forcing me to slow down. I was someone who could not stop, could not rest, could not take a break. I was constantly doing, achieving, pushing, performing. And the only time I would stop was when I binged. It was the only time I gave myself permission to just stop. Even though it came with shame and regret, in that moment, I wasn't working or achieving or trying to be perfect. I was just eating. Or afterwards, just sitting on the couch, watching TV, scrolling, trying to figure out how to stop binge eating. And sometimes that part was protecting me from going on another restrictive diet. I had a history of restricting, of starving myself, of being rigid and controlled with food. And the part that binged would rebel against that. It was like it was saying, no, we are not doing that again. We are not going back to deprivation and restriction because that hurts us too. So even though binge eating felt terrible and caused me so much distress, that part was actually trying to help me in the only way it knew how. Now here's a perspective shift that changed everything for me. I realized that the part that binged wasn't me as a fundamentally flawed human being. It was a part of me trying to protect me. And once I understood that, once I stopped seeing it as the enemy and started seeing it as a protector, even if it was protecting me in a way that wasn't actually working, everything shifted. I also came to understand something really profound. That part didn't even like what it was doing. It didn't enjoy the binging. It didn't want me to feel ashamed or sick or out of control, but it was the only way it knew how to get my attention in that moment. It was like a smoke alarm going off, annoying, loud, disruptive, but trying to alert me to something that needed my attention. Now, let me introduce you to another concept that's been really helpful. When we talk about parts, like the part that binges or the part that criticizes, you might be wondering, well, if I'm made up of all of these parts, then who am I really? And that's where what I call the anchored self comes in. You might hear other people call it the core self, the true self, your essential self. Different frameworks use different names, but they're all pointing to the same thing. The anchored self is the you beneath all of the parts. It's the wise, grounded, compassionate center of who you are. It's the part of you that can observe what's happening without getting swept away by it. It's the you that exists when you're not in fight or flight, when you're not in survival mode, when you're feeling safe and connected. And here's what's important to understand. The parts are not the anchored self. The part that binges is not the core of who you are. The part that criticizes you is not the core of who you are. The part that restricts is not the core of who you are. Those are all parts, aspects of your personality that developed to help you navigate difficult situations, to keep you safe, to protect you in some way. Now, when I understood this, that I had an anchored self that was separate from, but connected to my parts, it created this space. I could see the part that binged as something separate from the truth of who I am, but also as a part of me. Not an enemy, not an invader, but a part that was trying to help, even if its methods weren't working. So think about it like this. Imagine you are the captain of a ship and you have a crew. Your crew members each have different roles, different personalities, different ways of trying to keep the ship safe. Sometimes crew members might make decisions that seem counterproductive. Maybe one crew member thinks the best way to avoid a storm is to sail in circles, while another thinks the best way is to drop anchor and wait it out. Those crew members aren't trying to sink the ship. They're trying to keep it safe. They just have different ideas about how to do that. And sometimes their methods clash with each other, or they don't actually solve the problem. And that's what's happening with your parts. The part that wants to binge and the part that doesn't want to binge, they are both trying to protect you. They just have different strategies. And when you as the captain, as the anchored self, can understand what each part is trying to do, you can start to coordinate them. You can help them work together instead of against each other. This brings me to a really important point. A lot of people think that the goal is to get rid of the part that binges, the part that wants to eat a lot of food. They think if they could just eliminate that part, make it disappear, silence it permanently, then they would be free. But that's not actually how it works. Parts don't go away. They transform. They take on different roles. They learn new ways of protecting you that actually work better and cause less pain. When you try to get rid of a part, when you fight it or suppress it or shame it into silence, it usually just gets stronger. It gets more extreme. It fights back harder. Have you ever noticed that the more you tell yourself, I'm not going to binge today, the more intense the urge becomes? It's because you are at war with that part and it's fighting for its survival. What you resist persists. When you push against something, it pushes back. It's true in physics and it's true with your parts. But when you start to understand a part, when you get curious about what it's trying to do for you, when you approach it with compassion instead of criticism, that's when things can shift. That part doesn't need to fight so hard anymore. It doesn't need to be so extreme. It can start to trust you, the anchored self, to take care of things. So let me give you an example of what this looks like. Imagine you have a part that desperately wants to eat everything in the pantry right now. Instead of fighting it, instead of saying, no, you're bad, go away, I hate you, you get curious. You might say internally, I notice there's a part of me that really wants to eat right now. I wonder what's going on for that part. What is it trying to protect me from? And you might start to notice, I just got off a really stressful work call. Or I'm feeling anxious about something coming up. Or I've been restricting all day and my body is in panic mode. Or I'm exhausted and I haven't given myself any time to rest. When you understand what the part is responding to, you can start to address the actual need instead of just fighting the symptom. You're no longer on opposing teams battling each other. You're becoming teammates working toward a common goal, which is your well-being, your safety, your peace. Now, I mentioned earlier that sometimes you might feel like a rebellious teenager when you binge, and other times like a scared child, and other times like you're on autopilot with no feeling at all. This is evidence that there are multiple parts at play, each with their own age, their own energy, and their own needs. The rebellious part might be protecting you from restriction, from rules, from feeling controlled. The scared child part might be seeking comfort and safety. The autopilot part might be protecting you from having to feel anything at all. These aren't character flaws or signs that you're inconsistent or unstable. They're different parts, each doing their best to help you in the way they know how. And they are all connected to experiences you've had. Things that happened in your past that taught these parts that they need to step in and protect you in specific ways. Understanding this completely normalizes the experience of feeling like you have different versions of yourself. You do. We all do. And those different versions aren't random. They developed for specific protective reasons. So where does this leave us? If fighting the part that binges doesn't work, and if we can't just get rid of it, what do? We learn to work with the part. We learn to understand it, to communicate with it, to help it trust us so it doesn't have to work so hard or be so extreme. We learn to meet the actual needs underneath the binge urges instead of just battling the urges themselves. And here's what I've seen happen, both in my own life and with my clients. When you start to do this work, when you start to understand your parts and work with them instead of against them, you gain information you wouldn't have had on your own. You start to see what that part is protecting you from. You start to understand what it needs. You start to be able to have conversations with it in the moment. Some people, when they first learn about parts, are really excited. They immediately resonate with, yes, there are multiple parts of me. And for others, there might be skepticism or even some confusion. This whole thing sounds a little weird or kind of woo-woo or maybe made up. But what I find is very consistent is that when people start to learn about their parts, they're able to do things they couldn't do before. Maybe it's being able to have a conversation with the part that really wants to eat in the moment instead of just giving in or white-knuckling through it. Maybe it's understanding why they're stuck and can't take action on something important. Maybe, and this was true for me, it's finally being able to rest, to take breaks, to stop pushing so hard all the time. Parts work helps people who feel stuck get into action. And it helps people who can't stop finally give themselves permission to rest. It works both ways because it addresses what's actually happening beneath the surface behaviors. Now, I want to be really clear about something. This is deep work. This is the stuff that's happening under the hood that most diet programs and willpower approaches never touch. And sometimes we can't access our parts on our own. Sometimes we need support. We need someone to help us identify and communicate with these different parts, to help us navigate the conversations, to hold space for what comes up. And this is a lot of the work I do with my clients, helping them learn to identify their parts, communicate with them, understand what they're protecting against, and ultimately live in greater harmony with less pain. It's profound work, and it's work that creates lasting change because it addresses the root instead of just the symptoms. Now, next week, we're going to continue this conversation about parts, and we're going to move on to, kind of ironically, we have a 2-part episode about parts. So next week in part 2 about parts, we're going to specifically talk about how to work with these parts. We're going to get into practical questions that you can ask, language that you can use, what to do when parts are in conflict with each other, and what it looks like to build trust between your parts and your anchored self. So for this week, I just want you to notice. Start paying attention to the different parts of you. Notice when you feel that pull towards food and get curious about what part might be active. Notice if there's a part that criticizes another part. Notice if you can sense different energies or ages or perspectives within yourself. You don't have to do anything about it just yet. Simply notice. Start to see that you're not one single unchanging self who's either good or bad with food. You are a collection of parts, each trying to help you in the way they know how. And when you can see them, when you can recognize them, that is the first step toward working with them instead of against them. Your body is always communicating with you, and your parts are part of that communication. Learning to listen, really listen, is one of the most loving and powerful things you can do for yourself. That's what I have for you today. I'll see you next week for part 2 of this episode, where we are going to dive into how to actually work with these parts in practical, concrete ways. I'll see you then. If you've been trying to stop binge eating and nothing has worked, there's a reason. I created the Binge Breakthrough mini-series to help you finally understand what's driving your binge eating beneath the surface so that you can actually start to change it. Each video is short, and they're designed to give you the clarity and direction you've been missing so you can stop feeling stuck and start finding your way out. Start watching now at janepilger.com/mini. That's janepilger.com/mini. MINI.